Recently I had the good fortune of going to a workshop that a colleague of mine gave. As a psychiatrist in Los Angeles, and he's really has been on the cutting edge of some of the neuroscience research, which is kind of where I began 27 years ago. It's scary, isn't it? Kind of where I began all that time ago. So I thought today I would take you through a little bit of the different parts of the brain and how we actually form habits, how that actually happens in the brain, and what the research is showing and what the implications are for us in terms of how to actually create habits and how to break habits. Okay? So I'm just going to draw as I speak. So when we think about the brain, I'm just going to draw it like that. Okay, that's the brain, right? The brain has an input. Now I want you to try and follow this because some of it's really new information, some of it's old. And I want you to really get this because I just found it absolutely astounding, this information. So we know that there's a true self and there's a false self. And they both actually are competing for space in the brain. So here's the first clue. You and your brain are two different entities. Okay? So your mind and your brain are not the same thing. How you think of yourself, your opinions, etc., it's all that sort of stuff, is not the same as the brain. And that will lead to some interesting conclusions as we go through. So we'll talk about this stuff a little bit later. So let's have a look at what happens in the brain. Now let's say you've got a thought or a feeling or an urge for something. A Krispy Kreme or a Lamington or, you don't want to go to the gym or all of that stuff. You think that's you, right? They're your thoughts, correct? They're your feelings. They're your urges. So let's put them here. Thoughts, feelings, and urges. Okay, and they lead to an action. And when actions are repeated, they're called habits. And that's what we think is happening. Now, here's something really interesting. There's a step that comes before that. And what comes before that is a brain signal. Okay, now, you've got a brain signal that happens before the experience that you have of being yourself. This is really interesting. It comes 0.3 of a second before you actually have those thoughts. So before you're sitting there thinking, I'm going to have this, you think that that's where it starts, that you're making a decision. But 0.3 of a second, 0.3 of a second beforehand, there was already a signal from the brain for that to happen. You're just swept in the tide of it. And you think it's you. The question that you need to ask yourself is it really you? And we'll talk about that as we go through. Here's the other really interesting thing. From the time you're thinking all this stuff, where you're thinking, you know what, I'm going to yum, I really want this, I deserve it, all the little thoughts you have about, how you make yourself do stuff that, deep down inside, isn't really you. Okay? From there to there is 0.2 seconds. The entire process from when your brain decides something is happening, not you, to when you go off and do it, is half a second. Half a second. Can you see why habits are so powerful? Because from the moment you're aware of it to the moment you do it, you've got 0.2 of a second to actually decide yes or no. Do you know how quickly that goes past? How many of us are mindful enough that we're aware that this is happening? So, how many of us then get caught up in that tide? From the minute you're actually sitting there thinking, it's a done deal. It was decided over here. You've got nothing to do with it, right? So this is where it has to become a little bit more you've got to get a little bit more savvy. We all have to get a little bit more savvy with ourselves. Because this part here, the brain signal, the parts of the brain that are actually mediating that are actually the cortex, okay, which does all of the executive functioning and thinking and planning. So think about this. The part that decides and plans can tell you to do the wrong thing. So, what are you going to decide to do? You'll see as I go through what I'm talking about there. The other part that's involved here in the brain signal are the drive centers, like your hypothalamus, you know, your temperature regulation, your hunger, your thirst, all of that kind of stuff. And then there's a reward center, so-called. It's a nucleus called the accumbens. You don't need to know these names, I'm just, you know, reminiscing. But it's about survival and pleasure. It's probably, Aristotle's entire brain would have been about that, right? Okay, so, you know, so everything in here, think about it. The ability to plan what your urges are, what you want, what you need to survive, and pleasure. That is where your decisions are coming from. Now, they are complicated by something we'll talk about in a moment. But when we come to thoughts and feelings and urges, we have another part of the brain involved there. There's a part called the amygdala and the insula, right? Now what they do, the amygdala basically mediates fear. It ups your heart rate. It gives you shortness of breath. Your sense of dread, those gut level kind of, you know. So this is going, oh my God, I'm too hungry, I need something, or, you know, I can't be without it, or this is jumping up and down, having those urges. Does that make sense? So if you're not aware that there are circuits in your brain which can make this seem like it's your urge, like you really want this to happen, then the natural progression, like you have a chance with 0.2 seconds, right, is that you're going to go and that Krispy Kreme will be history. Right? So it's interesting. When we come to this part, the third part, the parts of the brain that get involved there and light up in terms of habits and actions are a part of the brain called the basal ganglia. Now the basal ganglia are about automatic thoughts, automatic feelings, and automatic actions. So anything that you've rehearsed, i.e. habits, it's the habit center that lights up. So can you understand that if you're going to change a habit, you're right, your only chance is in this 0.2 seconds, right? But there's another way too. Change the circuitry in the brain signals. And this is where it gets really exciting. Because we've heard recently about neuroplasticity, okay? The ability of the brain to change itself and to rewire itself. And, you know, when I studied medicine with Hippocrates, you know, we were told basically that by age 6, the brain had fully formed. That after that, you couldn't really have any other kind of activity happening. Right? We now know that it happens, you know, continuously and keeps going. But the thing is that there are a few laws that have been established, neuroscientific laws that have been established about the brain, which are very useful. The first one is called Hebb's law. And Hebb's law basically states that neurons that fire together wire together. Right? So basically what that means, if you have a circuit of neurons that are involved in a particular behavior, like munching on a Krispy Kreme when you think you need it, right? Then you're practicing those things. Every time you use that circuitry again, it makes it stronger. It makes it absolutely stronger. But here's the other law. It's called the quantum Zeno effect. And this is fascinating. Because how do you change the wiring of your brain? And guess what it turns out to be? Surprise, surprise. Focused attention. Go figure. You know, it took 25 years of neuroscience to find that out. Right? Focused attention literally acts like glue, helping the new circuitry to stick So if you focus on something, you're actually building a circuit for it. You're actually building a circuit for it, and you can actually change the wiring of your brain. Now, why is that important? Because can you see how is at the wiring level that the decisions are made about what your habits are going to be? You see? And unless you are very aware and can work in 0.2 of a second, to veto that last step, it's going to be very, very hard. So, let's have a look for a second. If this is the case, and we have a choice, then why do we end up with circuits that need to be changed? I mean, surely you'd think the body would want to survive and have the best outcome. So why is it that we start off with brain signals that are geared to us, for us to do the wrong thing for ourselves? And that's because when we start off in life, our life is really just a series of consequential errors. We draw conclusions about things from childhood to now, and we create stories. And we believe those things to be true. And there are 5 words that begin with A that are very important, that kind of will help you to think about yourself a little bit and how we form these. The first one is when we feel we don't have attention. Rejection, being excluded. We create stories about that. The next one, acceptance. Being accepted just as we are without feeling we need to change for the people that we're with. That's another big one. The third one that I've written down here is affection. Physical warmth, appreciation for who we are. Appreciation itself. I'm valuable. My group thinks I'm valuable. And allowing. I'm allowed to be me and to play out me with these people with no danger. And the big problem is that we start off needing those from other people legitimately. But at some point, we don't make the transition to give those things to ourselves. And that's very critical. Because the minute you give these things to yourself, then you have more power over what you can wire up, what beliefs you have. Do you pay attention to yourself? Or do you just run on autopilot? Do you accept yourself? Do you appreciate yourself? Do you have affection for yourself? Do you allow yourself to be? And most of us don't. Most of us don't. So when we start to look at these things and we start to, look inside ourselves, we can create a space to generate a different kind of attention. Because what we focus our attention on will, through the quantum Zeno effect that I was telling you about before, allow new circuits to be glued down. And as they become the predominant circuitry that allows you to run your life, you are then not using the other ones. Which means the other ones slowly disband. And that's how you change habits. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's a lot deeper than we think. It's not just about the free will or the free won't. Okay? Although, if you're aware of this, a good question you can ask yourself, and this is the last thing I'll say because it's a huge topic, but when you're over here and you think that this is you, the thoughts, feelings, and the urges, just ask yourself this question. What does this really mean to me? What does it mean to me? Because when you ask yourself that question, your self quickly steps up and says, well, I don't know what it means to you, but to me, it means this. Like, this Krispy Kreme really has no value to me. I mean, I'm picking on that, but, it could be carbs, anything, any addiction, someone, you know, so you're attracted to other than your partner, all of that kind of stuff. It could be anything, right? So the point is, whatever urge it is, right? Ask yourself, what does this really mean? And your true self steps up and you know if it has meaning for you or not, real meaning. You know. And when it doesn't have meaning, even if it feels logically like the thing you should do, don't do it. See how that changes your life. Thank you. Absolutely.